kind of talking about the importance of that experience. But Sonia, it's such a good reminder. I think what's so important for a network like REAMP in terms of like what's brought us together, kept us together, and made us successful is I think it's really that focus on people's experience. Whether they're brand new, and they're just like getting welcomed to the network, or, they're coming to the annual meeting, or they're showing up to a Zoom meeting, whatever it is, like delivering a really great experience for people in community, I think is what keeps people kind of coming back to REAMP for more. So it's such a good reminder. Thank you. So Sonia, were we going to do put people into pairs to do introductions between them, or should we just launch into the talk?
I think actually we could just do quick introductions in this group since it's pretty small.
I love it.
Yeah. How about just a quick introduction of your name and where you're joining us, which hat you're wearing today would be great because it's a small number. How about I'm going to just call people in the interest of time. Ellen.
Thank you. Ellen Schultz, representing the PA contingent, large state, PA Environmental Literacy Capacity Building Group and Project.
Thanks, Ellen. Emily.
Hi, I'm Emily Shancy with the Chesapeake Bay Trust. I'm a program manager on the outreach and education team, and I manage a lot of our environmental literacy work, community-based organization capacity building work, as well as our Chesapeake Conservation and Climate Corps.
Abby.
Hi, I'm Abby Lichtenberg. I'm also coming from Pennsylvania. I work at a intermediate unit, but I am here today as part of the South Central Environmental Literacy group for PA, as well as our regional STEM ecosystem.
Awesome, glad you're here. Emily Thorpe.
Hi, everybody. I'm here representing Envision the Chop Tank, which is on the eastern shore of Maryland.
Thanks. Krista.
Hi, all. I work out of Maryland, but work for the North Chesapeake Bay office. And yes, my name's Krista Hogan-Ryle.
Glad you're here. Jamie.
Good morning, everybody. Jamie Baxter with Chesapeake Bay Funders Network. I think we intersect with a lot of these different networks that are here. And great to see all of you.
Good to see you, Jamie. Katrin.
Hello, good morning, everybody. My name is Katrin, and I'm joining today from Richmond this morning, and I just started out 2 days ago as the new administrative assistant for the Chesapeake Bay Funders Network. Thank you for having me.
Yay, welcome. And is it Katrin?
Yes, Katrin.
Okay, sorry, I got that wrong. Thank you. Hi, and yeah, we're so happy to have you join this community. Shannon, good to see you always.
Good morning, everybody. I am Shannon Sprague. I work for the NOAA Chesapeake Bay office, and I represent the Chesapeake Bay program and the Regional Outdoor Learning Network initiative that we have going on over here. And I'm also part of Envision the Chop Tank and a similar effort we have going on down in Virginia called the Habitat Focus Area in the Middle Peninsula, or the Round Table down there.
Shannon. Alan.
Morning, everybody. Alan Gerard with the Maryland office of the Chesapeake Bay Foundation, and I'm also on the steering committee of Envision the Chop Tank.
David.
I'm David Christopher. I'm the Marine Education Specialist for Delaware Sea Grant at the University of Delaware down in Lewis. And I'm also active in the Delaware Association for Environmental Education.
Glad you're here, David. Adam, good to see you.
Morning, Adam Frederick, the Assistant Director for Education in Maryland Sea Grant at the University of Maryland and the Institute of Marine Environmental Technology in Baltimore.
Renee, are you here with us?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, yeah. I'm with the Anacostia Coordinating Council, which is located in Ward 8 of Southeast Washington, and I am an associate with the organization.
So glad you're here. Bart, I think last but not least.
Yeah, morning all. I'm kind of just in transition here a little bit. So I'll say hi, Bart Merrick. I work for the NOAA Chesapeake Bay office, and like Shannon and Krista, kind of support Chesapeake Bay program stuff and the Regional Outdoor Learning Network and Envision the Chop Tank. Good to see everybody. Thanks.
Wonderful group. And just to remind you of the structure, Sarah will talk a bit. There'll be plenty of room for questions. And then there's even a half an hour add-on just in case anybody wants to stay on for some deep personal attention.
Well, good morning, everybody. Good to see all your faces. Thanks for doing the introductions. As Sonia said, I'm Sarah Shanahan. I'm Director of Community Management for the REAMP Network, where I've worked for about 15 years now, which seems incredible. Although I wasn't always playing the same role in the network. You know, I've worn various hats over the years. As Director of Community Management, my job is really to foster and support the connections and collaboration of our members across the network. So I do a lot of the membership services work, orientations, new member interviews, like new member engagements. I help support our tools that we use, like our online collaborative platform or our database, like I'm responsible for managing that. And then I also do some meeting planning and facilitation. Like, you know, I work with our members who plan our annual meeting, for example, every year. So doing a little bit of everything. Now, you know, last time when we talked, I talked a lot about the start of REAMP, right? And how we kind of got our launch and our growing pains as, you know, we went from this like group of 20 people who, you know, were doing a mapping process to, you know, 180 organizations, you know, and over 500 individuals as part of the network. And today I'm going to be talking a little bit more about, you know, our growth, I would say, kind of midterm to today. So there'll be a lot more talk about, you know, how we've embedded equity into our work. And I'm also going to be sharing a little bit more like tools and mental models for you that I hope will kind of maybe help you think about your own context in a helpful way as well. So, you know, again, you know, when we talked last time, I love this diagram. This is something that we've used from the Human Systems Dynamics Institute, but I think it's such a great representation of the story that I'm trying to tell. You know, when REAMP did start, you know, we were this like group of people who were coming together because there was this crisis, right? There's a climate crisis. And the way that we had been doing business as usual wasn't working for us. So we knew we needed to do something different, right? And that's how REAMP kind of got its launch, right? And what really kind of brought us from this place of like kind of being like, we're not very close to certainty or agreement. What really brought us closer for us was that systems mapping process we did. And over time, you know, we brought in a lot other of like policies, procedures, rules, regulations, right? Like getting membership guidelines, for example, you know, getting our mission and vision and values clarified. You know, that really brought us as a network more towards agreement and certainty together. But what happened over time then too is we had a little bit too much. There wasn't enough room for new ideas, for new ways of doing, new ways of thinking, for things to emerge from the network. We were getting a little too stagnated. And so we really kind of needed to focus on this middle space here about, you know, how can we kind of open the network back up and really kind of, for us, live into our values that we had here in REAMP. You know, when I talked last time too, I kind of described the early structure of REAMP, which looked like this. And if this was confusing to you, perfect. I got my point across because it was confusing for us too. And we were the ones living in the network. But, you know, for us, we just got a little too big, a little too fast. I described the behavior of REAMP as kind of like a Christmas tree, you know, where everybody got to hang their ornament on. But at a certain point, like the tree just couldn't hold all those ornaments anymore. And for us at that time, like, you know, we were just experiencing a lot of dynamics around power imbalances. You know, who got to make decisions, you know, who was benefiting from them, who suffered from the decisions that were being made. We didn't have clarity about like how all these different pieces of work were really rolling up into something greater. And, you know, it put pressure on us financially too. You know, it's really hard to sustain, you know, when you get a little bit too big, which is where I think we had ended up. And the beautiful part about a network though, right, is that you have this ability to evolve. Right? You can change, you can adapt over time. I think that's such a powerful feature of a network. And, for us, so this was all taking place maybe around like between 2013, I would say, and 2016 is, we were having conversations with members, and members were also confused and unsatisfied with the status quo of things. We had independent evaluations of the network to kind of really figure out like what were our strengths, what were our weaknesses, and what were the opportunities for us to really seize to really be more effective together. And we also had to take a look at, what our budget would be able to sustain for us. And I think today we've landed on a structure for us, at least right now, right? Because nothing is ever and always in a network that's really working for us and has simplified things for us and made things more cohesive. Members are still at the base of everything that we do, right? Our members are advocates and funders from nonprofit organizations. Those members are now electing a steering committee at large. The steering committee is setting the strategic direction of the network, and they oversee staff. They also oversee our grants committee, who's doing some of the re-granting within REAMP. That grants committee is supporting some of the structure of the network. That is a competitive process, but we have state tables and action teams where members are collaborating and aligning their work around. We also have non-competitive ways for members to kind of come together. So staff are overseeing members coming together within our strategic priorities and within our peer learning circles. So for us, we've kind of simplified our structure, at least for today, that I think meets the needs of what we have. But again, nothing's ever and always. But let's talk a little bit more about like REAMP's evolution. And I think for us, like getting those values in place, and our values, by the way, are collaboration, community, democracy, justice, equity, and scientific rigor. I think getting clarity about those really helped us then like put those values into practice. I think one of the most important ways that changed us was in thinking about how we do good analysis. So when I told you the story about REAMP from the launch of it, we had this policy goal of an 80% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions. And when we talked about the ways that we were going to get there, our members went to a lot of technical solutions, right? Like, maybe we need gas as a bridge fuel. Hey, we got to focus on like getting these high voltage transmission lines so we can move clean energy from the plains states, over to the East Coast, so on and so forth. But we did this really powerful exercise that our strategic director led us on. And she kind of asked this question, like, okay, if we were going to really live into our values, especially around equity, what would that change about the way that we approach analysis? And so we actually did this with members, and we asked them, to do what I just described. Like first, hey, if this is our goal, is 80% reduction, what comes to mind? And people listed all of those technical solutions. But when we reframed it and we asked people, hey, so what if instead our charge was to equitably eliminate greenhouse gas emissions, how would we get there? And we saw a huge difference. We saw a huge shift in the mindsets of our members, right? All of a sudden, they moved away from technical solutions to solutions that really embodied people. And in fact, it was this mental model that then shifted us to adopt a new North Star goal. Because, as we really centered equity into our work, our members were like, whoa, we need a North Star goal that really reflects our values here in REAMP. So we had gone through a process to update our North Star goal, which today is to equitably eliminate greenhouse gas emissions in the Midwest by 2050. Something else that's really evolved for us in terms of our understanding of doing good analysis is it was really hard for us to put all this time and energy into an analysis that was going to be static. And that's what we had at the forefront. Because everything changes so quickly, right? Our members are doing good work out in the world, right? They're changing the world around us. We're learning new things, new opportunities pop up. All of this is moving so quickly. So while we still ground ourselves in good analysis, we're doing this in a more ongoing way and a little bit more bite-sized. But it's still that good analysis that helps people develop strategies that allow them to take actions. As they take action, they change the world around us, they learn new things, and that's got to kind of feed back into our overall greater understanding. So we've kind of more adopted a mental model around a very virtuous relationship around analysis, action, and learning. And I think that's also been a big change for us as well. Oops, went a little too fast there. So back to this landscape diagram, right? So I'm talking a little bit about how our understanding of how we're going to make a difference on climate and what our guiding light is has changed. Well, as we kind of thought about, again, like how we're going to create and hold this emergent space, we were really focused on the relationship building, and the culture of the network, right? So REAMP's motto is to think systemically and act collaboratively. So how can we build a culture internally that reflects that motto? One of the ways that we did this was we launched a program called the Muscles and Mindsets Program. And we've actually done a few iterations of this and called it different things as well. Most recently, we called it a collaborative leadership program. But I think the intent and the basis for it is the same. And it was really a recognition that to be a good collaborator, you actually need a certain set of skills. And just like if you wanted to go be an all-star basketball player, you can't just go pick up a ball and shoot a free throw, right? Like that takes work, right? It takes practice, it takes drills, like it takes intentionality. And being a good collaborator also requires the same things. So we ran this program 3 or 4 times now, where we really focused on identifying mindsets that we want to see more of and less of. And through structured partner conversations and group conversations, we're exercising awareness around those and also practicing other skills that it takes to be a good collaborator. So things like, active listening, working and challenging power dynamics. There's a whole host of them that we have that were built into this program. But I think this has really helped us build more capacity within about how to be good collaborative leaders, which is something that I think we often take for granted. The second part of our motto too, and this is about the thinking systemically part, is, how are we going to create a culture within of thinking systemically? And, what we did is we actually launched the REAMP Systems Thinking Academy. We invested in staff. So our strategic director in particular went on to get a master's in systems. And when she got that degree, she came back and she created this program for our members and for REAMP. And what was cool about the academy is we designed it in such a way that people are bringing their own situation of interest to it. So as they're learning, they're also applying and practicing at the same time. And so we've run this academy every year since 2015, and we've done much like the muscles and mindsets, right? Nothing is like ever and always. So we've done adaptations of this over time as well. In fact, I've even led a systems thinking academy, bringing in some of the practices from the Human Systems Dynamics Institute where I've been trained through. So, we're always adapting it, but again, like it's really in service of building that culture that we want to see here in REAMP, which is about thinking systemically and acting collaboratively. And so those are 2 ways that we try to practice that and build that from within. I think overall, like I wanted to kind of make this list about, just some of the big changes that were made here in REAMP. And again, I think a lot of this was really driven by the fact that we had clarified our values, like we had clarified who we are and who we want to be and how we want to work together. And that changed some of the policies, procedures, the ways that we do things as we really wanted to live into those values. Like I had mentioned the North Star goal already, or investing in staff. I think early on in REAMP, we were more eager to invest in facilitators or outside consultants. And it's not that we never do that, right? Sonia just said, hey, we're working with REAMP again on their annual meeting. Of course, we still use some outside help sometimes, but we really do primarily try to focus on our members, right? How can we invest in our staff and members to either build this capacity or deliver what we need to the network overall? Another big shift for us too was actually the way that we're bringing people together, right? This was also part of the introduction here earlier. But our annual meeting, I think, is a great example of that. In fact, I would call our early annual meetings more of like an annual conference. It was really about content delivery, right? A sit and get. And now we're really about that input and experience. And I think this is so important for including frontline communities or folks who really work on the ground in that way, right? Like we want to hear their experience, their wisdom. We don't need somebody to sit up and tell us like, the best analysis or, this is what we should be doing, from David Ehrlich's book or whatever. We really want to hear from the folks that are on the ground who are living this. One of the, I'll share a story of how we've kind of lived this through our annual meeting. So our annual meeting is 3 days. And since 2018, I guess, at least when we're in person, what we try to do now is we carve out an experiential component for that meeting for participants. So in 2018, we were going to North Dakota. And in North Dakota, there are 14,000 oil wells. 11,000 of them are on the Fort Berthold Reservation. So for our annual meeting, while we were out there, We took a 12-hour bus tour through the Fort Berthold Reservation, through the Bakken oil fields, and we heard from people who were in that community about, you know, what they were seeing, what they wanted to see differently. And it was extremely profound. I think for a lot of us, you know, we talk a lot about, like, you know, methane flaring, right? When they're burning the gas from an oil well. But have you ever seen one up close and personal? Probably not. And it was really impactful. I also think what was really memorable about that experience too is, you know, hearing from the people in that community, because they weren't necessarily saying this is the worst thing in the world and we want to get rid of it completely. No, in fact, they're very dependent on the income that comes from leasing the land for those oil wells, but they do want to see better practices, right? And better care for the land, even if we are using it in this way. So it was, it's still one of, I think, the most memorable experiences for our members who went there. Like, that is something that they still carry with them today. And so we're really striving for at our annual conference, which is the biggest meeting that we have of the year, to continue to build in those type of experiences that I think just really profoundly change us at the core. You know, I talked too about this shift in our systems approach, right? I've talked a lot about that in terms of how we're thinking about tackling climate. But I shared last time too about how we've shifted this to think about ourselves and the social systems mapping work that we're doing to map the network, to see people, to see their relationships, to see where folks are living within the network, and to use that information to kind of adapt and change and grow the network over time. You know, when I think about our analysis too, some things that have really changed for us too is around, you know, the way that we think about how we're getting to where we need to go. So I would say previously we were really focused on outcomes. We had benchmarks, right? So things like, hey, by 2035, we have to make sure that 30% of electric vehicles are being sold. But as we've really embedded equity into our work, and this has been like through conversations with our members, and as well as some independent third-party evaluations, instead of benchmarks, we now have a set of guiding principles that we've developed. So we have a set of 6 guiding principles. And I think of these as like the bumper lanes in a bowling alley. So as we roll our ball down the lane, making sure that we're staying in line to where we want to go, like hitting those pins, going towards our North Star goal, those guiding principles and those bumper lanes make sure that we don't end up in the gutter someplace. So instead of that outcome of like, hey, like we need to make sure this many vehicles are sold that are electric, you know, it's more about like, you know, are we really centering human well-being? You know, are we helping the community as a whole? You know, is this in line with our goals and values here? And I think that's really kind of shifted the way that we prioritize the type of work that we're doing. And that shows up in our grant making as well. You know, REAMP in the past was really focused on this prime time model of regranting. You know, what is right for our win and what can we do right now? And we've shifted that to really focus on this collaborative grant making. So I think a great way that we've demonstrated this is through our state collaboration work or our state table work. We actually do a block grant out to the state, and it's groups in that state then who come together and tell us, here's what we need, here's how we're going to spend the money, and here's who's going to get it. And I think that requires a lot of trust on our end, but I think it's really helped our members, especially in states that have not historically had a good context, and you know, groups may not have been very aligned there. It's really given them that time and space to build the relationships that they need, you know, so they can really come together and think strategically together and really build the capacity for the movement as a whole. You know, in the past, we've had staff who have really done like the synthesis and learning. In fact, we had somebody who was a knowledge manager. That was their title. And their job was basically to like read through all the grant reports and write up another report about what was being learned. But what we realized is like that really siloed the learning in the network. And so something we've tried is what we call the peer reporting system. So instead of having people like type up a grant report, we actually paired them with somebody doing similar work in a different area. And they kind of did a report together, right? And did a debrief together. They did have a structured conversation. They took some notes, but it was a way, like the intention was like, you're both learning together now. And it's not just like coming through central staff. We're going to read the reports. We always do. But the intention there was to get members to do that. And honestly, that was met with mixed reviews. Some people loved it. Some people didn't. And, you know, again, in thinking about the way that we act equitably, we really did rely a lot on written communication, especially folks who are working in the front line. they don't always have the best written skills. And that doesn't mean that their work is any less important or that we shouldn't be funding it. But it's harder to see that when you rely on one style of communication. So we've actually opened up our grant reporting and our grant application process to be open to both written and verbal. So I know in our last grant round, we actually had somebody a group did a presentation to our CEO about their proposed work. So just being open to like thinking about different ways of doing things that are more inclusive for folks. And even for our grant reporting now, folks have the option of course, writing something up if that's what they're comfortable with. They can also have a conversation with our CEO if that's how they would like to do their grant reporting. And the last tool, and I'm going to show you this one in particular, it's one we absolutely love, is, we've always had kind of like separate goals and evaluations. So if we think about like some work that we funded, for example, like a state table, they would have told us like, hey, here's our goals. And we would have an evaluation tool that we would use afterwards to look and say, okay, yeah, it looks like they did the things that they did. A tool that we use now instead is called a success spectrum. This actually came from our Muscles and Mindsets program, but it's a tool of getting group agreement of your vision and the work that you propose to do together, which then you can also use as its evaluation tool. So with our state tables, they would submit their own success spectrum, like, hey, here's what we're going to do, here's what success is going to look like, and then we could use that as their evaluation for them. So I'm gonna show you an example of it. For us, when we thought about like doubling down on this equitable deep decarbonization, not just decarbonization, we wanted to think through what that would look like for us. And in the success spectrum, what you're really doing is you're first like kind of focusing on like, okay, what is our real goal here, right? What's target success for us, right? And then when you get that column filled out, you can also then ask yourself, okay, well, if this is what target is, what would wild success look like, right? Like epically successful work look like, for this topic. And on the other side of that, what would be minimum, right? What is the bare minimum that we would say, like, we did a good enough job on this? And what would failure look like? So again, it's a way of getting that shared vision built together, which then you can come back to, right? Because you've built it together to evaluate yourselves with, right? In a really fair way. I actually, in my presentation, which I think will be shared, I did include a template for anybody who would like to use this for yourself or your group. And in REAMP, we use this both ways. Like, as an individual staff person, I sometimes use this as I'm, thinking about a project and getting started. We'll use it together. We ask, some of our members to use it. So we use it in a variety of ways. It's one of our favorite tools to use. One of the other things I kind of wanted to call out here is I wanted to talk a little bit about tension, right? Tension is something that just exists in networks. And I know for myself early on, this was something I really shied away from. I thought, tension, that's hard. We don't want to go with like things that are different. Like, let's focus on where we agree, where things are same. But the reality is in a network, that tension is there. Sometimes you need more of it or less of it. It's not bad. It's not good. It's just there. And it can actually be a source of innovation, of something new. Right. So think about like those when I was talking about the early days of REAMP, right, as we were getting organized, but then we got to a point where it was too big to manage. That was tension that we were feeling, right? Our members were feeling it. We were feeling it. And what were we going to do, right? Like we could feel that there was this power imbalance, right? Some people had power, some people didn't, and it didn't seem fair. So how are we going to kind of shift this in a way to really bring fitness to the network overall? I'm naming this as tension. The Human Systems Dynamics Institute calls these interdependent pairs. What I have here on the screen is actually the mindsets that we used from our Muscles and Mindsets program, because these are also the same thing, right? Your mindsets have a real hold over the way that you behave and act together. And in our Muscles and Mindsets program, like we tried to identify the mindsets that we wanted to see more of and less of. And it was this intentionality of naming them, being aware of them, paying attention to them, that we were able to really shift these things, like the idea that we don't have time to include everybody, right? By including everyone, we're going to slow everything down and we don't have enough time for that, versus everybody has a role to play, right? So sometimes we just need to slow down so we can include everyone because everybody is important and we need to make sure that we're including them. So, for us, this is how we've sort of used it and named it as well. Again, like even if you weren't doing anything meaningful with it, I think just knowing this, being aware of it, naming it, it will just help you overall kind of pay attention to it. And it really did drive the way that we were together here in REAMP, or how we would design meetings or anything else. I included a template in here for you as well around that too. But, as I'm kind of wrapping up here a little bit, a few things I want to encourage you to do is, I think networks are really complex ecosystems. And I had said in my first talk about how we were really trying to simplify things in REAMP, right? Like how can we communicate in a way that's easy to understand? And I think one of the best ways to do that is to really think of some really good analogies. So for REAMP, we would use this garden analogy as we talked about our network, right? And that this analysis that we do, like that's our soil, that's our base. It's what grounds us, and it what feeds what all of our work that we do. And then we have things like our action teams that are like little plants emerging from the ground. And, as network, there were other network structures that we were using to kind of like support and encourage the growth of the grants. And then we have these state tables, and our state tables were really making sure that like the conditions around our garden were good. So as these plants emerged, they were able to grow, they were able to bear fruit, they were able to replicate. And then that, as the plants die, they give back to the soil, they feed us overall. So really, this was just an encouragement to think about some of those analogies to help your network think about who they are, how they should be. We've used this when we were, kind of shifting even the way that we talked about, like, why do we need to take a systems approach? Well, the analogy we would use is like, think that you're going to build a skyscraper. And you might think, oh, I'm going to do this just like a house, and I just got to put on my foundation and start building. Well, no, actually, like if you kind of understood like a little bit deeper understanding of building a skyscraper, you'd know the first step is to build a giant hole in the ground. So again, whatever your analogy is, I think analogies are really powerful in networks, again, because we're so complex. Think about ways that you can simplify it and communicate it in a way that other people can understand. And I wanted to share just some of my own kind of simple rules and wisdoms with you. Now, the thing with these is like, again, like I said earlier, it's not always and ever, right? And some of these we do all the time, some of them we don't do all the time. But these simple rules are things that we love reminding ourselves because it kind of reminds us how we want to be together here in REAMP. I put this one first because I actually think this is one of the most important rules in a network, is to never do anything alone. And to the extent possible, get members to do the work. And that's because that creates ownership, right? You are a part of this. You are creating this. You are responsible for this. And when you just rely on staff to do all the work, like members don't have that ownership over it. So never doing anything alone, always including others, getting people to do the work. I think networks are, at least for us, we really see it as this place where it's time to try things. It's okay to experiment. And sometimes things don't work out. That's okay, because we're going to learn something. And that learning is going to what kind of helps carry us forward. Process is also something so important in a network, right? I can't say it enough. Process, 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 process. And I think that's so critical because like when you have this big group of people, you need clarity about, who gets to make decisions, how decisions are going to get made. And that is what makes people okay with the outcomes. People get uncomfortable with outcomes when they don't understand why that decision was made, right? Why that outcome happened. But if you have a very clear process, and again, if members have done the work to help create that process, they really have ownership over it, then when you follow it, people are going to be okay with the outcome, no matter what it is at the end of the day. Remember that people are really the heart of your network, so take the time to care for them. And like I said earlier too, like nothing's permanent in a network, right? Like we're always changing, we're always growing, right? We're managing those tensions. So know that nothing's permanent and nothing's going to be perfect. And that's okay, right? So don't let perfect really be the enemy of good. And from my own experience, I can tell you, like I constantly feel like I'm never doing a good enough job. Okay, like that's just kind of the reality. And I think that's just okay, right? Like it makes me want to keep doing my job better. But again, with a network that's so big, so complex, like you can't always be exactly the same thing to everybody, right? You can't always meet everybody's need at every moment in time. And that's okay, right? You just got to kind of keep doing your best and keep going forward. And, like I can't tell you how many times I have such a great idea, right? And I'm in the middle of the network, so I can really see it. And I've spent all this time like working on it, making it awesome, and then I present it, and you know what's going to happen? Somebody's going to blow it up. But that's okay. Like, you just really have to practice that like humility and being humble. And honestly, even though I thought my idea was so awesome, it usually ends up much better after I've shared it with other people and we've turned it into something a little bit different. I think it's so important to orient people, especially new people, right? Because they're kind of the source of that innovation, of that newness. They could be the future leaders of your network, and they require a lot of care and tending too. So whether that's orienting them, welcoming them, inviting them into spaces, like take the time to do things for those new folks and make it fun. I mean, maybe our 12-hour bus ride in North Dakota wasn't the definition of fun, but we've done things like have conga lines in the hotel lobby. You know, we give people pipe cleaners to play with at a table while they're sitting at a meeting. You know, just find ways to have fun and bring that lightheartedness to the work because this work is hard. You know, everything we're doing is extremely hard and it can be really heavy on us. So try to bring some lightness to it. It'll really make a big difference for people. And then, you know, finally, just when you are feeling stuck, just do one thing, right? Like you throw a pebble into a lake and it ripples all the way out. Like one small action can make a big difference. So don't be afraid to try something. Just go ahead and do it. In fact, I have two other things to show you here, just a couple of models for you. This is also from the Human Systems Dynamics, but this is a framework we use all the time because it's just 3 simple questions that you ask yourself that just help you move forward when you're feeling stuck, right? What is it that we are experiencing right now? So why does that matter? And now what can I do differently about it? And as you make that one small change, guess what? Just like our analysis, right? It changes things and you got to come back and ask yourself, okay, what is the situation now today? And so what's different about it today, right? And now what am I going to keep doing differently? These 3 questions are just a way to keep you moving forward so you don't get bogged down and stuck, which is so easy to do in a network. You can feel paralyzed very easily. And the last tool that we use is this tool around inquiry. You know, I think as humans in general, I'll speak for myself. It's very easy for me to be judgmental or to be defensive or to make assumptions about why somebody's behaving the way that they do. But by really practicing inquiry, like I'm taking myself out of the equation and I'm really trying to humble myself and learn and listen. And that's so important when you're in a network, a group of other people, right? So how can you turn your own judgment into curiosity? You know, how can you turn disagreement into shared exploration? How can you turn that defensiveness into self-reflection, right? And how can you turn your assumptions into questions? Because that's how you're going to keep things moving forward and open in a network and kind of holding that space around emergence that we wanted to. Now, I mean, we're not done here in RAMP, right? Like, you know, we're still on our journey to really embed equity into who we are and how we work and how we do things. We still have a long way to go, but we're aware of it and we're constantly practicing and constantly asking ourselves some of these questions. And we're always trying new things. You know, we aren't afraid to try things. And like I said, if they don't go well, that's okay. We're going to learn something from that and we're going to improve it for the next time around. But this is what I really had to share today. So I'm going to stop sharing my slides because I think it's time for some conversation here, I believe. I haven't looked at the chat, but I saw there was a lot of things coming in.
Yeah, well, Jamie said this felt like therapy, which, yeah, I feel, you know, like how they have support groups for EDs, like there needs to be a support group for network coordinators or backbones. Ellen had a question about asking what the state tables are.
So our state tables were really a reflection of that evolution of, you know, living into our values and kind of changing our grant making. So when I talked about our grant making in the past, it was really campaign focused. And what we had heard from members, what we found in our evaluations and through conversations was that what people in the Midwest really needed that they didn't have was they needed the space and the time to build the relationships that they needed to have those hard conversations about the strategies that they should be taking collectively. And they just didn't really have that. You know, people were coming together once a year to try and think strategically and make decisions about money, and that just didn't work. So in our state table model, it was really intended to like give people money to like build those relationships So early on, a lot of our state tables had like quarterly retreats, right? And that's what we were paying for. Or they were trying to bring in new voices, right? Because we know that the environmental space has been dominated by mostly white organizations. So a lot of these state tables would then use that money to help fund the capacity for smaller and oftentimes frontline communities to be part of it. And again, they were making these decisions themselves. We were kind of doing this block granting. What we have found over time, though, is like our state tables don't need quite as much of that infrastructure anymore. You know, we've been funding them since 2014, 2015, and now we're calling it more of like a state collaborative project because they really have a lot more of that relationship and foundation that now they're ready to do some things together. And again, every state was different, right? Like what North Dakota needed was completely different than what Ohio needed versus Kansas, Michigan, whatever. So again, like they had that ability to kind of tell us what they needed given their context. And we tried to give them the backbone support so they could get in a position to be where they're at today to really be more effective in their campaigning and strategy making.
Thanks, Sarah. Any other questions? Feel free to just come off of mute. I know I have one. So I'm curious about your resiliency, especially around the funding models that have kept you evolving and going for 20 years. That's something, you know, we hear a lot about questions around like, how do you fund these things over time? You know, we know these things, you know, it takes a lot of time to build a network, a healthy network. So yeah, how funding strategies, resiliency strategies, that kind of thing. What's your story?
Yeah. You know, REAM's interesting because in terms of like our budget, it's definitely been really big at some points in time. It's also been very small at some points in time. And I'm sure many organizations and networks have the same experience. And that's where it's so important to like remain flexible in terms of your structure, right? Because your budget and structure, like there's probably some relationship there. And we are primarily funded through philanthropic foundations. So historically, that's where we've gotten a lot of our money from. But it's not always been the same funders. You know, our funders have changed over time depending on, you know, what type of work we're doing and what's needed and our relationship with that we've been building. And I would say over time, we've really tried to find ways to diversify our revenue as well. One of the things we implemented this year was membership dues. You know, and we collected a significant amount of money through membership dues this year. And yeah, we did have some members who chose not to renew, but most of them did, you know, because they're feeling that commitment. We also do charge for some of our programs and services. You know, we're hosting an Energy Democracy Summit. And, you know, we've asked members who have the ability to pay, you know, to help cover those meeting costs. And in some cases, for those who do have a greater ability to pay, to help cover the cost for somebody who doesn't have a budget, but is important to have in that room. We do some outside like training and consultation, kind of like I'm doing here today. So we do get some revenue that way. But, you know, we're always kind of thinking about this. And our CEO's job is to really do that fundraising work and do that relationship building. I think what's also cool about the way that we get our members money, so maybe less about like how we're supporting ourselves internally, is, you know, most of our CEO has built relationships with all these funders and has a close idea of like the type of work that they're looking to fund. And sometimes like we have great ideas that we don't always have the capacity to fund, but aligns with what we know a funder else wants. So a lot of times our CEO will help connect those two things. So even if it's a work that we aren't funding, but we know it's a great proposal and it fits in the wheelhouse of a funder, you know, sometimes that just gets funded outside of REAMP, and we're perfectly fine with that. You know, we're most interested in making sure our members have the support that they do need. So, you know, for us, you know, it is always a work in progress. It's something you got to be aware of. I will say that in terms of our staffing right now, it feels like we're about right size. There's 5 of us total. And our steering committee has communicated that. You know, every year we go through a budget setting process, and year after year, our steering committee has said, you know, it is important for us to have staff, and we know that. So for us, like that is actually like an important part of our budget. is making sure that we have enough money to fund our central staff at least.
Awesome, thank you. I'm gonna assume if you came off camera, you have a question. So correct me if that assumption is wrong. Bianca, do you have a question?
I actually don't have a question. I'm just typing notes and I came off camera just, I guess, for the sake of coming off camera and
Hey,
being
okay.
present. Sorry.
No, whoa, no, don't be sorry.
No, hi.
Happy to see you. Always happy to see you. Thank you. I will just open it up then for anybody else who has a question.
Yeah, I have a question, and thanks, Sarah. This has been great. It seems like you've invested a lot of time and energy in sort of training network members, both about networks and how they work, and also about systems change, let alone all the issues that you all engage in your work. I'm curious if you have what your turnover has been like in terms of different people representing different organizations or new organizations, and how do you manage sort of the need to help, you know, the patience that's required, right, to do work in networks, and what we've experienced is not a lot of appetite for talking about and learning about the networks and systems change as much as there is for doing it. So how do you balance the sort of need for regular training and sort of support to the network members, you know, with just getting engaged in the work and wrestling with, you know, with the issues?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Well, I think for both of our training programs, at least that I talked about, part of our design in those is that people bring their own context to it. So while they are getting training, they're actually also working through their own issues at the same time. So I think that just naturally attracts people, and they don't like think of it as like, oh, like I'm just doing this and it's a waste of my time. No, like you're actively going to be working on something related to your work already. So that already is like a bonus point, right? Plus you get some training. People are often hungry for these capacity building opportunities, because what we've noticed is that for most of our organizations, like that professional development isn't always a priority in their budgets. So it's kind of a service that we offer that they might not get through their organization already. I would say too, you know, we do really rely on like member leaders in our network as well. So, you know, we have, you know, some really core members probably in each of our states, right, who are just, you know, they're the super users of the network, right? They're so committed, you know, they're so embedded in it. They really believe in it. And we do rely on those folks too to help like include some of these new people. So if it's like, hey, like I have a new group in Kansas that's coming, I'm going to make sure that they get connected with those leaders in the state who are going to help bring them closer to REAMP, but also involve them in the state work as well, which is where most of our groups at least are doing their work. They're most connected to the local and state level. So those are two ways. I would say the third way that we kind of like build that culture too is in our meeting design. So whether it's an in-person meeting or a virtual conversation, we have a lot of intentionality in how we design those meetings. And even if it's not explicit, we have the meetings are always designed to do the things that we want to do, like, you know, building those relationships, bringing in some systems tools and ways of thinking so people are thinking about situations differently. And I think that people, when they have that experience, that's why I said it's so important to have an experience in a network, is they feel that experience. They keep that with them. They remember that. And the next time that they're in a collaborative meeting, whether it's outside of REAMP or not, they're like, you know what? I had this experience in a REAMP meeting. I'm going to include that in my own design. And we hear that a lot of times from members. It's like they'll come to a meeting in REAMP and have some, you know, we've done something design-wise that they were like, that was awesome. And I'm going to go model that now in my own collaborative effort. So, you know, we try to lead by example too. And I think it's those three things that have helped us build the culture that we want to see. So almost like a three-prong approach.
Thanks, Sarah. Question from Bianca. How have you engaged people apart from the core foundational work in an equitable way?
So like you're in the very beginning of the network, people who are a part of kind of like that foundational work of, charting direction and processes and putting things in place. How have you engaged others in a way that's inclusive and equitable, knowing that you can't bring everyone in at the beginning?
Yeah. Well, that's where that's why it's so important to stay open, so you can evolve and adapt over time, right? Like the same 20 network members who came together to launch REAMP, like those weren't the same 20 people, who were talking about how we're going to equitably eliminate greenhouse gas emissions and what that framework's going to look like, right? So for us, we do an annual member survey, and that's actually, I mean, it sounds kind of surveys. You're like, oh, whatever, Sarah, those don't matter. We actually rely on that survey a lot. We often offer it anonymously so people can say what they feel, but we do ask them some demographic questions so we can do some filtering. But that annual member survey is actually a really important way for us to get feedback on how we're acting in REAMP and what we might need to do differently. So we often, especially in that context, we're really paying attention to what people of color have to say in terms of, what we need to do in terms of programs and services, what their experience has been like. And, because again, like that's going to help us think about our design and our principles kind of going forward. And one of the other things that we've done too is that, as staff, we do a lot of the facilitation, but when it comes time, especially for like a big meeting, oftentimes we always have a co-facilitator with us, and it's always a network member. And there too, we're really trying to prioritize people who, aren't the traditional white environmental leaders that we often see in our network. So we're really trying to partner with some of the other folks who, have different ways of doing and different ways of knowing, and really bringing them into the leadership positions as well. And, at our annual meeting, I think this is a good example too. We do have a host committee, so members who are on the ground, who are in that state that we're coming to. We ask them also to we hold a few slots for kind of like invited partners. So people who they're working with, who are probably more of like the community-based groups, let's invite them to join our meeting and participate. So maybe they're going to be a keynote speaker like Sonia was talking about at our annual meeting. Or, maybe they're just going to be there to participate and join and share. Or maybe they're going to be leading conversations, sharing about the work that they're doing, what their experience has been. But, nothing's ever perfect too. It kind of goes back to like, we don't always get it right. And that's okay, but we're constantly just trying to find those ways to like make a difference, move forward, and learn, right? And use that learning to just continue to do better every time.
Thanks, Sarah. And we are at 1 hour, so I just wanted to give the opportunity for anybody who needs to hop off to ask any final questions. Before anybody goes, I do want to stick a little short, tiny little eval form in here for this program if you have a moment to fill it out. Thanks to those of you who filled it out last time. It was actually very, very helpful on the topic of evaluation. We do have a question about survey questions coming up soon also. So if anybody who needs to hop, wants to hop off, say goodbye, say thank you or anything. Otherwise, we're going to be here. Sarah's going to be here for another 30 minutes getting into these little kind of more nitty gritties as you want them. Renee said thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Adam. Have a great day.
Okay, you too.
Thanks, Ellen. Great to see you always.
Thank you.
David, glad you came. Bye. Okay. We are awesome. Folks are staying on our tiny but mighty group here. Wonderful. So a question here specific about the kinds of questions that you're using on your survey. Are there specific questions, specific approaches maybe you found in your surveys that are really eliciting important insights? I'd also be curious to know if you'd be willing to share any of your evaluation tools with us.
Oh, I mean, I'm sure we probably could share some of our evaluation designs. I'll first talk maybe about our annual member survey because this is one of our most important surveys. A couple of questions that we do ask in there that I think are, I can actually just, that I think are really important that we've used a lot is we do ask people just to tell us what their proudest accomplishment was in the last 12 months. So it's an open-ended question, just tell us what you're proud of. And then we follow that up and ask them, like, how did the network have an impact on that, right? Directly, indirectly, and not at all. So this has been interesting because I will say that over the years, we've seen a shift. We've seen a lot more indirect rather than direct, I would say, impact on people's proudest accomplishments. And for us, like, that's actually not that surprising, right? Because we've moved away from like the direct campaign funding where people would very easily say, yes, like I got money, so like that helped, to like more of like that softer indirect work, right? Like those relationships, the type of conversations and the framing that we do. One of the great examples of this is we had a summit on, we called it Clean Energy as a Human Right. And the intent of the summit was to say, hey, what if we thought about clean energy as a human right? And if we applied that framework, what type of strategies might we want to employ if we thought about clean energy in that way? And what happened at that meeting was that there was some conversations that percolated. People were interested. They were thinking differently. They took that back to their states. And about a year later, they launched a campaign against their largest utility, who was just a terrible utility, and started this like community campaign to get people at the community going to their public service commissions to telling them like, hey, here's what we think our utility should be doing. Now, REAMP didn't directly make that campaign happen, but it was an indirect result, right? Like it was a conversation and experience that they had that led to that. So we have seen a shift in there, and for us, like that hasn't been overall like that surprising. We asked people about their like what their satisfaction was with programs and services. And I will say this has been interesting for us because sometimes there's a mismatch between what we believe and what we see happen in here. So we've had a belief that in one of our projects in particular, we're like, man, this is like not going well. We're hearing some of these grumblings. We might need to rethink about doing this program. But in the survey, it had some of the highest satisfaction remarks out of all the programs and services we were offering. So that was information that we needed, right? And we kind of had to do a little bit more work around that. One of the things that we used in this survey too is we have some like questions that we ask all the time. So we do ask people about like, do you feel like REAMP's headed in the right direction? And how do you feel about our North Star goal? So it was actually this survey that led us to adopt a new North Star goal because we had seen over the course of 3 years as we embedded equity into our work that we saw a greater number of members growing in dissatisfaction with our North Star goal. So that was the feedback that was like, okay, we got to take this to the steering committee. Like we got to figure out a process now to go about this because we can see that, members aren't standing squarely behind our North Star goal anymore. And, we've used this too to like get ideas for trainings or conversations people want to have. But one of the interesting things that we did do, and it's interesting because I don't know if we've used it in a very useful way, but we've done this process evaluation. We've done this a couple of times now because we wanted to know, right, knowing how important process is in a network, we wanted to know how people have been feeling about this. Do you agree that like, our processes are free of favoritism, for example, or that, everybody has an equal opportunity to influence decisions? So we've had all these questions, and it is interesting. We haven't used it, I think, in a meaningful way, but it has been interesting to see the results. I know from the last time that we did this, overall, it seems like women have a better experience than men in terms of processes and REAMP. And we haven't found any statistical difference between whites and non-white members of the network in terms of how they view processes and REAMP. So this was just something interesting. This was actually some work that I think Gail had done, and we've done it twice. So it's not something we ask about every year because it's super long, but we have asked about it. Again, we haven't used it usefully, I feel like, but it's been an interesting tool to kind of reflect about and to think about a different way of evaluating your network. Besides our annual member survey, I think one of the most important questions we ask on our meeting surveys is, how did this meeting affect your feeling of belonging in REAMP? Because that's what we really care about, right? Do you feel like you belong to this network, right? And if people aren't feeling like they belong after a meeting, well, we need to go back and revisit our meeting design, you know, in the way that we're approaching these meetings, because for us, that's one of the most important values of a meeting, is that people feel connected. They feel like they belong in our network. So those are two that we've used. The other evaluation tool that I would say that we use is our social network analysis, our social systems mapping work that we're doing. And I did talk about that last time, but that for us is made a big difference because it allows us to kind of reflect as a network overall about how we're doing, and that has influenced some of the work that we've done. So the example that I'll give here is, and this view has changed since the story has happened, but the idea here was that, you know, we were taking a look at our network, right? And we have these strategic priorities. So in the story that I'm going to tell, we were looking at transportation, and specifically we had a split: electrifying, changing the way that people can move around. And when we kind of looked and used this network analysis to look at our map, we saw that there was a huge need for us to focus on changing how people can get around their communities. It was something that was more embedded in equity, and we had far fewer people working on it and far fewer relationships. So by seeing that and being able to reflect on that, we made that a priority specifically for our transportation work, and we started trying to recruit groups with that expertise to join the network and to share. So this map has also been a way for us to kind of like step back and think about, like, how are we doing, at least in building relationships and connectivity within a particular priority, and how is that changing from year to year to year? So I think that this has also been another useful tool for us as well when I think about evaluation.
Thanks. Yeah, I think there's some really innovative questions there. If you're able to, it would be wonderful. Even like a PDF, a cut PDF of your evaluation questions I could send out in the follow-up. I think it'd be really, really cool to dig deeper into the how you're framing the questions. Thank you. Any other evaluation questions before we move into some more kind of process and strategy question that's in the chat box? Abby, big thanks from Abby with transparency. Well, as you know, like, transparency is like a major value in networks, right? It's definitely a huge important when you're building community and networks. It's huge. Does that mean you're heading out, Abby? Are you saying bye-bye? Thank you so much.
I am. Thank you so much. Yeah, I really appreciate you being so open and sharing those things. We're really trying to build out our network, and getting people's honest thoughts and opinions has been difficult. We're struggling to get them to like fully and completely fill out a quick survey or anything like that. So some of these questions I think are really thought-provoking and might yield more authentic responses. But I've got to run. Thank you so much.
Yep.
Have a great day.
Yeah, nice meeting you. You know, Abby's comment reminds me too, is honestly, like, having one-on-ones with conversations with members is extremely powerful tool of evaluation as well. And you can oftentimes, like, especially if you have a good relationship with that person, you can kind of draw some more honesty from them. But that's another tool that we use that, you know, and sometimes we aren't always saying, hey, like, Sonia said this, like, that this was bad and we need to do things different. It's like, you know, I've been hearing that, you know, these are some of the problems that people are experiencing. And we take that in as feedback as well.
Awesome. Thank you. Bart was curious about, you know, there's this issue of these circular conversations where sometimes it can feel like we've been having the same conversation, you know, for a decade sometimes. I was in a meeting the other day and there was a frustration that, like, this is what we, you know, this has been the same conversation literally that we were having 10 years ago, you know, like folks struggle with that in all kinds of ways. So any strategies for moving people, you know, to action? And I know that adaptive what now, you know, is a good tool to get people when people are stuck. Are there any other strategies or tools you use to move people to action?
Yeah, sometimes it's kind of, I would say, sometimes it's about kind of going back to the beginning, which sounds terrible, right? You're like, no, why would I want to do that? But, in a place, so I'm thinking about one of the launch of our state tables. And it was a state that's relatively small. People knew each other pretty well, but they were still struggling to get on the same page. And what we did is we kind of took them back a step in time, and we used a system tool called Rich Pictures. And we got folks in the room. We were at a meeting. We split them up into groups, and we had them draw pictures of what they wanted their state to look like, in 2050. And some people were definitely like, this is stupid and a waste of time. Why are we doing this? And other people were like, oh, this is awesome. We're going to draw pictures. And we're like, just go with it. It's fine. But it was through those pictures that then when we brought them and compared them side by side, that we were able to identify some of those areas of similarity. Like, you both have, like, your groups have these things in common in your picture. How could we take that and use that to build a work plan from, right? That we can work together, at least for the short term, to start making a difference on. And just like that adaptive action cycle, right? Like, you start doing some work and you start heading down a path, well, then you eventually can come back and kind of revisit. Okay, now where are we at, right? Now what's different? What matters, what doesn't matter, and how can we then, like, make a choice to, like, keep moving forward. So that was one thing that we did that was actually really, really useful. Yeah. Sometimes, I will say too, sometimes we shy away from conversations that just aren't productive. I mean, we have members, for example, that are in favor of carbon capture and sequestration, and some that are adamantly opposed to it. And quite frankly, like, it's just not a conversation that we're holding space for in our network right now. Maybe that'll change in the future because, again, nothing's permanent. But for us right now, like, that's just not a conversation that we're going to be having. We're going to be focusing on other things that are related to our strategic priorities.
Awesome. Thank you. I love that. I love that using art to envision. Like, I think quite often we start with, like, strategy, but we actually haven't envisioned the future. We haven't envisioned, like, how we, what we see in our communities, in our states. And I love, there are prompts I think that can help us get there, like those, as facilitators, like, how might we, what would it look like if, like, as a facilitator, like, prompting that though in those ways. And then also bringing that creativity into, I think, is so important, because there are all these multiple intelligences. There are things you can kind of see in art that are hard to even put, into words quite often. And I think that this something I've been saying lately is, like, we can be the system that we wish to see in the world. Like, systems are so hard to understand, but we know when we feel like we belong and we matter and that we're creating something. We're, like, creating a system. We're creating something different that's, like, how we want to see the world. And I love that about networks.
Yeah. You know what? Actually, that reminds me, Sonia. I have two other examples of how we've kind of, like, helped people understand each other, I think, better, so you can move forward. We definitely had some tension in REAMP when we shifted towards this equitable deep decarbonization framework. And, there were things like, people who were fighting pipelines were seen as, like, those rabble rouser, like, never going to compromise type of activists. And then we had the folks who, are doing more policy advocacy work, who are more about compromise and, trying to reform from within. And so we did this exercise at a summit that we had where we had the 4 R's. We had resist, reform, recreate, reimagine. We had some definition. And we had people go there based on the work that they're doing and then share about why they were in that space. And what it did was it built an understanding and appreciation of where people were coming from, right? So now all of a sudden, like, we could understand why those people who were resisting the pipelines were resisting. We could understand why the people who were trying to reform the laws that were on the books were working hard to reform, and how collectively, these two strategies can actually work together, in tandem. So, like, that was another way of us just kind of bringing awareness and understanding about where each other's positions were, and why that matters, and how we could actually still work together and move forward together. So that was another example, I think, of where we were trying to build that understanding and appreciation where we may have otherwise kind of felt stuck.
I love that. And that's resist, reform, reimagine, and what's the fourth R?
Recreate.
Recreate.
I think that's been adopted now to be like relate instead of reimagine or something. I don't remember exactly, but
I've seen that
again, it's not
exercise in
permanent.
another context. I wonder if it's something we
Okay.
could just, yeah, Google. I wonder, yeah, I think it's a framework
Probably.
folks are using now. Cool, thank you. Any other questions? We got a handful of folks left. Okay. Well, you know, I always have questions. I am interested that the evaluation questions are definitely spark something in me because we hear from folks like, how do you measure collaboration? You know, like how do you convey to funders and others that collaboration, you know, like that story of collaboration? Bart says thank you. He appreciates the sharing of practice. How do you, yeah, so it feels like you're getting at some of that in your survey. But then I've also seen it like in your annual meeting, like where you literally invite people to like share stories about from the network of like of how folks are working together, how folks are collaborating, how folks are connecting, you know, and there's like story share I've seen happen at your annual meeting. Because again, like people, we live in a culture where, yeah, people want to see, you know, and I think we're trying, these are some of the systems we're trying to shift, right? Like in our networks, like it's not, you know, it's not, you know, it's, everything is not about this outcome necessarily, but there's a range, there's kind of all these other things that we can measure creatively in different ways, right? So my roundabout question is like, how else are you capturing those like important stories of change, important stories of collaboration that can then are, you know, are helping you to share your story or get money or whatever it is that people like need to do?
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you, it's something that we're striving to do a better job of. Because I think we haven't historically done a great job of capturing like the stories of success from REAMP. And I think it's hard because it goes back to like the indirect effect that we have on our members. So that annual member survey that we use is actually a really important tool because, you know, we have basically almost every member organization fills that out. And so then we can see like, you know, hey, 80% of our members said that like we had some impact on their proudest accomplishment. So that survey is one way that we do that. We also try to collect these like, we try to do like a little bit of almost like our own ripple effect mapping too. So sometimes as staff we'll sit down quarterly and be like, okay, like we had this thing that happened. Okay, what else might have come from that? And I'm even tracking some of that stuff myself where it's like, oh yeah, like I connected this person and that person and that led to this. You know, so sometimes I just have that and I need to write that down and collect it. One of the things that we want to actually try to do this year in preparation for our 20th anniversary is we want to think about how using our social systems map might be a way for us to collect some of the stories of impact that have happened over the years. So thinking about like some of those milestone events that have happened and inviting people to share like, hey, like, yeah, here's my story, you know, from that, you know, event or whatever. But, you know, it's something that I don't think we've done a great job on, and we're trying to do better. We also do use our social systems map to say, you know, here's the increase in connections that we've had over the year, right? And that's like actual data that we can use. We can see the change in the strength of connections over time. And then we're looking within those strategic priorities as well to see like what is the change in the map over time as well, because that's also more data about, you know, how we're doing, especially in terms of building that connective tissue here in REAMP.
Awesome. And yeah, speaking of the map, I'm curious, so your response rate is very high. Is that a requirement for your members to fill it out?
Yes.
Awesome. I think that is like baking that into like your membership like expectations is really important.
Yes.
And at the same time, I know that you bake in your members having to get on the map too when they sign up, right? So it's like an expectation that members are on the map. It's an expectation that they fill out a yearly survey. Like, I think that's really smart. Is there anything else that's like kind of baked into your expectations for network participants or members?
Well, it depends on their membership level. So all of our members, yes, are required to respond to that annual member survey. We have full members and ally members, and our full members are also required to vote, not vote, they're eligible to vote. They're required to attend the annual meeting, so we track that. If you're a full member, you're required to show up. You're also required to participate in some form of collaboration. So whether that's a state table or an action team or a network committee, it doesn't matter, but you're showing up to at least 50% or more of the activities within that collaborative effort. So we're kind of requiring that. That's spelled out in our membership guidelines as well.
Awesome. Yeah.
I will say too, something else that we use to try and help get responses is we give away prizes. So like even for our annual member survey, even though it's required, you know, we give 10 random prizes to people who complete the survey. So we're always trying to find those little carrots too, in addition to the sticks, to get people to do the things that we want to do.
Yeah, you guys
and
are great.
I think collecting the stories of impact that you can share, right? So when we ask people to fill out the survey, we say, you know why we have the North Star goal we have today? Because of this survey. That's why it's so important for you to like fill it out. You know, hey, you know how we got our strategic priority set? That's because you gave us that info in the member survey. That's why you need to fill it out. So we're also giving those reasons why it's important, how it's made a difference in the network.
Awesome. Yeah, leading with that like deep why. That is so critical. Very cool. Again, any other questions? Just anything being sparked for folks here? We got people kind of in all like stages of like network development in this room too. And like network catalysts, you know, network coordinators, people working at the regional scale here, people looking at this working at the state scale. So yeah, there's a diverse group here, even though it's little. Bianca, any other? Are you just getting present with us again? Yeah. Well, if nobody has any other questions, we are just about at 11:30. So I think we can end a few minutes early. And I will get these tools out to folks. And I'm also curious in your decision, like how you guys make decisions too. That's a whole other wormhole, but maybe if you have any tools or models or anything that you use in that world, we might be able to, because people are interested in new ways of kind of making collaborative decisions together, and like when and why you use different models. Like when does it make sense to do it? When are things too cumbersome? So anything in that area I think could be helpful for our networks too.
I mean, honestly, for us, the short answer is that, you know, if we're going to start a new process, we get a committee of members who design the process, and then the staff implement the process. So as simple as it sounds like, that's a lot of times what we do. If there's not a clear decision to be made, all right, let's get a group of people, let's get a committee. They're going to be the ones who make that process clear, and then we'll just execute it.
Very cool. That makes a lot of sense. Appreciate you, Sarah. Appreciate all of your time, your wisdom, it's wonderful to be in community with you. I know I have learned so much over the years being with you and getting a chance to see REAMP in action. And it's always inspiring and moving and educational and critically important work. So thank you. And thank you to all of you.
I want to thank you all. Yeah, I was going to say thanks to everybody else. I know everybody else is doing really good, hard work out there too. So give yourselves a pat on the back.
It's true. It's true. They are. I'm inspired by all of these network leaders every day. Thank y'all so much. Feel free to come off and say goodbye. It's always nice to see people's faces and hear their voices before we go.
Bye, thank you. Have a good rest of your day.
Thanks, Emily.
Bye all. Thanks, Sarah. Thanks, Sonia.
Thanks, Bart.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.
Wonderful to see Emily. Bye, Alan.
I think you can stop the recording.
Yes, that is what I'm trying to do.